Jaguar Wright reveals why Solange is scared of Beyoncé and Jay-Z, Hollywood's dark secret exposed. Solange Knowles hasn't been seen publicly with her sister Beyoncé in years, and Jaguar Wright says that's not an accident. According to her, Solange didn't just walk away from the spotlight, she walked away from a machine she didn't want to be part of anymore. And now, everything we thought we knew about that infamous elevator fight, and what it said about Beyoncé and Jay-Z's world, is being re-examined through a much darker lens. It started in May 2014 at the Standard Hotel in New York. After a high-profile Met Gala after-party, Solange, Beyoncé, and Jay-Z stepped into an elevator. What happened next became the most talked about 30 seconds of surveillance footage in celebrity history. Solange lunged at Jay-Z, kicking, punching, and swinging a purse with enough force that its contents spilled onto the floor. Beyoncé stood silently unmoving. Jay-Z didn't fight back. A bodyguard hit the emergency stop. The public explanation, at the time, was simple: Solange was upset over Jay-Z's alleged infidelity. The world ran with it, fueled by Beyoncé's later lyrics about Becky with the good hair. But years later, that surface-level narrative is cracking, and what's underneath is far more disturbing. Because if that attack was just about cheating, why has Solange remained silent for almost a decade? Why has she all but vanished from Beyoncé's public and professional life? She wasn't part of the Renaissance tour. She wasn't thanked at the Grammys. She's absent from family photos and hasn't been seen with Beyoncé's children. The sister who once stood center stage in defense of her family has disappeared, not because of distance, but fear. That's what Jaguar Wright has been saying for years. Long before mainstream media paid attention, Jaguar was calling out what she described as dark practices inside the music industry. She named names: Beyoncé, Jay-Z, Clive, Davis. She didn't speak in riddles. She warned that silence was bought, and truth was punished. And now, as more testimonies emerge, her warnings are starting to align with other voices. Voices like Kimberly Thompson, Beyoncé's former drummer. Kimberly filed a restraining order against Beyoncé in 2018, claiming she was under constant surveillance and facing spiritual attacks. Her claims were dismissed at the time, even ridiculed by tabloids. But in court documents, she alleged intense control, financial interference, surveillance, and intimidation that extended into her personal life. The mainstream press laughed, but the industry didn't. Because Kimberly wasn't just an employee, she was part of Beyoncé's all-female band for 7 years. She worked in close proximity on world tours, in rehearsals behind the curtain, and her exit wasn't quiet. It was legal. She said the control extended beyond the stage into spiritual and psychological manipulation. Jaguar Wright doubled down. In interviews, she described an ecosystem in the music industry built on silence, image, and intimidation. She called it out for what it was: power protected by branding. And every time someone tried to step out, that branding would respond like a machine, shutting them down, erasing them, or pushing them into isolation. Solange then wasn't an outlier. She was a warning. That elevator wasn't an outburst, it was a last stand. And here's where the story deepens. Uncle Ron, a man identified as Beyoncé, and Jay-Z's former security detail, came forward in recent years, echoing claims that cast new shadows on their legacy. He described a culture where secrets were currency, where silence wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. Ron said people close to the couple knew too much and got out, some by choice, others not so lucky. Solange appears to have chosen the first option. She stepped back. No cryptic tweets, no interviews, just absence. And now her silence is speaking louder than any tell-all ever could. The growing distance between Solange and the Carter Empire coincides with a broader unraveling within the industry. As lawsuits mount against Sean Diddy Combs, another titan in the same circle, questions about who knew what and when are no longer avoidable. Beyoncé and Jay-Z aren't just acquaintances of Diddy. They've shared stages, award shows, business ventures, and elite events for decades. Beyoncé has headlined his celebrations. Jay-Z has brokered deals alongside him. But, with Diddy under federal investigation, neither Beyoncé nor Jay-Z have said a word. No public statement, no tweet, no interview. The silence is strategic, but the silence is also revealing. Because this isn't just about one scandal, it's about a pattern. And for those watching closely, it's clear Solange may have been one of the first to sense that pattern and reject it. Which brings us back to that moment in the elevator. It wasn't just rage, it wasn't just personal, it was political. And it was punished. After that elevator incident, Solange wasn't just written out of the public narrative, she was slowly erased from the inner circle. No official fallout was announced. No family drama was acknowledged. She simply faded from the Carter orbit, and nobody explained why. But in hindsight, the silence feels deliberate. Her absence from Beyoncé's massive Renaissance tour, from photos from public events, these aren't oversights. They're patterns. And the people drawing attention to these patterns aren't anonymous conspiracy theorists. They're insiders. Kimberly Thompson, Uncle Ron, Jaguar Wright. Each of them at different points close enough to see behind the curtain, and each of them now on the outside looking in. Jaguar Wright's voice has grown louder over the years. She's accused the music industry, including figures like Beyoncé and Jay-Z, of creating a culture where talent is exploited, truth is silenced, and power is worshipped. She called out Clive Davis Diddy and the machine that protects certain names at all costs. Her message, if you speak out, you're gone. If you resist the image, you get erased. And that's what she says happened to Solange. Not through scandal or controversy, but through quiet exclusion. Solange didn't play the game. She chose distance. And in an industry where control is everything, that choice came with consequences. It mirrors what happened to Carrie Hilson. Carrie was once positioned to be Beyoncé's competition. She had the talent, the image, the momentum. But after releasing Turning Me on a track interpreted by many as a jab at Beyoncé, her career nosedived. Fans turned, industry support vanished. And though Carrie never explicitly blamed Beyoncé, the subtext was obvious. She crossed a line. And the system made her pay for it. Jaguar says this isn't coincidence, it's control. And Solange, she believes, saw it firsthand. Then came Uncle Ron. A former bodyguard for the Carters, his revelations were more direct. He claimed to have witnessed the manipulation of people and narratives, including rumors that Jay-Z's history with Aaliyah went deeper than the public ever knew. Ron suggested that Aaliyah's sudden death wasn't just tragic, it was convenient. These claims on their own might seem speculative, but together they form a pattern of people close to the core who either vanished, were discredited, or distanced themselves under murky circumstances. And the silence from Beyoncé and Jay-Z only fuels suspicion. For a power couple that built their brand on empowerment, social justice, and Black excellence, their refusal to address serious allegations around those in their circle is jarring. Beyoncé has stood in front of glowing feminist signs. She's amplified voices of women worldwide. But when women like Cassie Jane Doe 1 through 23 and Kimberly Thompson come forward with serious allegations against men in her professional orbit, the response is silence. That silence doesn't go unnoticed. Especially not by the Beehive, the loyal fan base that's begun asking hard questions. Not just about why Beyoncé won't speak up, but what that silence says about the values she promotes. Because when Kimberly says she couldn't change her hairstyle without Beyoncé's approval, and Jaguar says careers are shaped or broken behind closed doors, the message is clear. This is about control, of image, of influence, and of people. Solange's absence is one of the few acts of resistance we've seen from within that world. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't drop a diss track. She walked away. Quietly. Deliberately. And that speaks volumes. In an industry where proximity equals power distance is a risk. But it can also be a stand. Solange's silence, then, isn't a void, it's a statement. She didn't play along, she didn't defend, she didn't co-sign, and now her decision makes more sense than ever. Because as more insiders speak up and as more connections come to light, the mythology around the Carter Empire is starting to crack. The elevator moment wasn't just drama, it was the beginning of a shift. One that, for Solange, never needed to be explained. She lived it. The unraveling of this narrative doesn't end with Solange. In fact, her silence has become the backdrop against which other voices are now rising. Voices that used to be silenced, dismissed, or labeled as unstable. But today, those voices are being re-examined not because they've changed, but because the world finally is. Jaguar Wright is at the center of that shift. Years ago, when she first began naming names and describing the inner workings of the industry, many brushed her off as bitter or dramatic. But, one by one, her claims are starting to align with testimonies, legal filings, and public behavior patterns that are impossible to ignore. She said Beyoncé was part of a structure that prioritized silence and submission. She said Jay-Z used influence to keep certain people quiet. She warned that Diddy wasn't acting alone, that the industry protected him. And long before the lawsuits hit, long before the federal investigations began, Jaguar Wright was saying what nobody wanted to hear. And then there was Kimberly Thompson. Her restraining order wasn't just about personal grievances, it outlined specific behaviors, psychological pressure, and even alleged surveillance. The court didn't grant it, citing a lack of evidence. But what it revealed was a person who once stood inside Beyoncé's inner circle, now claiming that the environment was toxic, controlling, and spiritually draining. Kimberly's words, strange at first glance, sounded increasingly familiar as Jaguar echoed similar themes. Power, influence, control. A machine that demands total loyalty and removes anyone who breaks formation. Which brings us to another name, Aaliyah. The tragic death of Aaliyah in 2001 has always been surrounded by questions. A last-minute flight overloaded with equipment. Perfect weather. A seasoned pilot. The official explanation, pilot error and misjudgment. But behind that, whispers lingered. About her connection to certain industry figures. About the abruptness of her departure. And about who may have benefited from her absence. Uncle Ron's claims added fuel to those whispers. He didn't suggest Aaliyah's death was staged. But he did suggest it wasn't just a tragedy, it was part of a larger pattern. One where people who resist the machine find themselves sidelined, silenced, or worse. Ron spoke of Jay-Z's alleged past connection with Aaliyah, that she wouldn't play by the rules, that she didn't submit, that she stood out for the wrong reasons in a system that values obedience above all. His words weren't accusations, they were reminders. That in this industry, the cost of non-compliance can be steep. And, if you're wondering why all of this is coming back now, it's because it never truly went away. The same cultural machinery that elevated Beyoncé and Jay-Z to mythic status also buried stories that challenged that image. Stories of artists who vanished, creatives who fell off, women who were silenced. Take Carrie Hilson again. She had everything going for her hits endorsements talent. But after a few perceived slights toward Beyoncé, her career unraveled. The backlash was swift, the message clear. You don't criticize the queen? And yet today, those old slights look more like warnings. Hints that not everyone was willing to play along. That some people were trying to speak up in music, in interviews, in silence. Jaguar says this isn't new. It's just being seen now because more people are brave enough to look. The old playbook, protect the image, dismiss the critic, praise, the loyalty is starting to fail. Even within Beyoncé's fan base, the questions are growing louder. Where is the advocacy now? Why is the voice that once stood for women's empowerment so quiet as other women, black women, come forward with allegations against people in her sphere? This isn't about guilt. It's about complicity. Solange's elevator moment didn't just fracture the illusion. It foreshadowed what happens when someone on the inside breaks the code. She wasn't shut down publicly. She was erased quietly, but she's still present, still watching, still not playing the game. And in her silence, there's a message for all of us. In the world of celebrity, silence is rarely neutral. It's strategic, it's shaped, it's rehearsed. But Solange's silence hasn't followed that playbook. Her distance from Beyoncé and Jay-Z isn't manufactured for mystery. It's consistent, unwavering, and, above all, telling. Because while others release cryptic social media posts or drop subtle jabs in lyrics, Solange has remained absent. She doesn't make veiled statements. She doesn't offer vague support. She simply isn't there. Not at the Renaissance tour. Not at the Grammy stage. Not in the family photos. Not even in proximity to Blue Ivy Rumi or Sir. The message, whatever happened behind those closed doors, left a divide that no press campaign could mend. And that takes us to the bigger question: what exactly did Solange see? We may never know the full answer, but the context surrounding her exit grows more damning by the day. Kimberly Thompson's legal filings, Jaguar Wright's testimonies, Uncle Ron's behind-the-scenes confessions, the countless stories of Black women whose careers vanished after they stood too close to the flame. Even Beyoncé's all-female band, once held up as a symbol of empowerment, now feels like a mask used to hide how tightly controlled the ecosystem really is. Kimberly didn't just talk about spiritual pressure. She talked about artistic micromanagement, surveillance, and a level of control that extended far beyond the stage. And when those in power use silence as protection, the ones who leave quietly, like Solange, can seem invisible. But they aren't. Her absence has become the evidence. Let's be clear, Solange is not bitter. She didn't seek headlines. She didn't monetize the moment. She simply stepped away. And in an industry that punishes dissent, that choice took courage. Meanwhile, Beyoncé remained silent on the allegations swirling around her longtime friend Diddy. The lawsuits, the testimonies, the federal investigations, still not a word. This is not about demanding a comment on every scandal. It's about consistency. Beyoncé's brand has long been one of activism, feminism, empowerment. But when it comes to holding powerful men in her circle accountable, her silence speaks louder than her songs. And Jay-Z's silence, it's even heavier. Because he's not just Diddy's peer, he's part of the same apparatus, the same award shows, the same boardrooms, the same billion-dollar clubs. And that's where Jaguar Wright's message cuts through. Her criticism isn't about gossip, it's about the machinery of silence. About how fame, power, and control are used to protect some and erase others. It's about why someone like Solange, an artist in her own right, an independent voice, would choose exile over complicity. Because in this world, the rules are clear: protect the brand, defend the legacy, never challenge the image. Solange broke that rule, even if just for a moment, in an elevator, in front of cameras that were never supposed to see it. And from that point on, she was frozen out. But the irony is, the more the industry tries to silence these voices, the louder they become. As new lawsuits emerge, as survivors step forward, as whistleblowers speak out, the narrative is shifting. And that elevator isn't just a viral moment anymore. It's a symbol of resistance, of truth, of what it costs to speak up, and of what it means to be erased by the machine. As we reach the end of this story, what once seemed like an isolated outburst in a hotel elevator now stands as a powerful metaphor for everything we've come to learn about control, silence, and image in the entertainment industry. Solange's action was never just about a personal dispute. It was a rupture, a moment where someone inside the machine pushed back, however briefly, and paid the price. Since then, her silence has said what words couldn't. She didn't give interviews. She didn't post cryptic messages. She didn't capitalize on controversy. She simply disappeared from the narrative constructed around Beyoncé and Jay-Z, a narrative that has come under increasing scrutiny as more allegations, more testimonies, and more former insiders speak out. Because this isn't just about the Carters, it's about the system they represent. A system where those in power stay protected, where speaking out means isolation, and where silence is used both as a shield and a weapon. Kimberly Thompson tried to fight that silence with legal action. Jaguar Wright used her voice, her platform, and her credibility as a former artist to speak openly. Uncle Ron gave names timelines and first-hand accounts. And Solange, perhaps the most subtle of them, all simply walked away. Together, they paint a picture of an industry built not only on talent and branding, but on control. When you step back and trace the lines between these individuals, the same themes emerge again and again: suppression, intimidation, exclusion. But also resistance. Jaguar Wright isn't backing down. She's been right before, and now she's being heard. Kimberly, though, dismissed by courts, made history by daring to accuse one of the most powerful women in music. Uncle Ron, though controversial, opened a door to questions many were too afraid to ask. And Solange reminded us that sometimes the most powerful message isn't shouted. It's in the deliberate act of not showing up, not playing along, not smiling for the camera when everything behind the curtain is falling apart. In a cultural landscape obsessed with visibility, her invisibility was radical. Beyoncé and Jay-Z's silence in the face of so many converging allegations might be strategic, but it also feels increasingly hollow. Because when those who once stood beside you are now turning away or being pushed out, the silence doesn't protect. It condemns. As federal investigations around Diddy continue, as more survivors come forward, as the media begins to reevaluate the idols it once protected, Solange's decision to distance herself no longer feels like a mystery. It feels like clarity. And maybe that's why this story still matters. Not because of the fame, not because of the drama, but because it exposes how power operates behind the curtain. It reminds us that image isn't everything, that silence is never neutral, and that even in an industry as loud as music, the quietest actions can echo the longest. So when Solange stepped into that elevator and made her stand, it wasn't just about defending her sister. It was about rejecting a system. When she vanished from the narrative, it wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. And now, years later, in a world finally starting to listen, that wisdom is being heard. She didn't need to explain it. She lived it. And she walked away with her voice intact.